Hey guys, Steve from Bush Gear. So I'm one of those that overlands and does all the 4x4 excursions with an older vehicle. And being an older vehicle, obviously maintenance and upkeep is more important, especially when you're outside warranty and all the rest of it. So I'd like to touch on basic vehicle inspections you as a driver needs to incorporate into your 4x4 and overland excursions, predominantly before trail as well as after trail. It's also important during overlanding to often stop over, have a basic walk around your vehicle, as well as when you get to campsites, make sure you do a basic vehicle inspection either the morning before you leave or the afternoon you get to camp. So the first thing you need to do with an older vehicle is check for basic fluid leaks. So I'd normally start off, I'd get under the vehicle, I'll look down behind the bash plates, I'll look around the CVs and all the rest of that. Let's try and see if you can't find any form of fluid leaks. So generally speaking, if you've been off the road, if you find any spot that looks wet or any spot that it's clean, it's normally an indicator that something is leaking. So the second part of the inspection is the engine bay. No need to be a mechanic here. You just need to know your basic fluids, what levels they need to be at, and obviously you need to keep those as spare within your vehicle. So right down from coolant all the way through to checking the oil and your dipstick, just run through the fluids within the vehicle and just make sure they're all where they need to be. The last thing about engine inspection is go down, have a look down to belts, all the belts that run in the vehicle, make sure that there's no tears or cracks or anything like that wrong with the belts. Also have a basic squeeze along all the hoses. Nothing is loose, nothing is leaking, and nothing looks out of the ordinary. As I said, you don't need to be a mechanic. You just need to know what it looks like, so when something does go wrong, you can identify. The next part of inspection is have a look at your driveline. Especially when you're driving in the bush, those hardcore trails, you could have taken a knock on your prop shaft, you could have had some grass wrapping around in certain places but it shouldn't be. You don't want to risk it catching a light or anything like that. It does happen. So get underneath the vehicle, have a look at your prop shaft and all the rest of your different drive lines when it comes to your CVs, all the rest of that as well. Have a look behind the CVs, make sure your CV boots haven't been punctured by any rocks or any sticks that you might have picked up when traveling. Look for any grease that might have been spilled out or anything like that. So you simply get under the vehicle, and pull out anything that shouldn't be there. So as you get to know your vehicle, you will learn certain characteristics and certain areas of the vehicle that is very important. So again, from an overlanding perspective, check your wheel nuts every now and again, especially the corrugations, and make sure they're torqued correctly before you do any form of overlanding. Walk around the vehicle, climb underneath, have a look, make sure all the vital nuts and bolts that you know of and is there is fastened and everything is looking happy. With those corrugations, anything can rattle loose. The last thing you want is missing parts and you don't have the spares with you. The next part of your vehicle inspection, especially when it comes to the 4x4ing side of things, is to have a look at your recovery points. Especially if you've done a trail before, there was some hard snatching, some heavy work on the vehicle, make sure all your recovery points are still in a safe condition and there's the way they're supposed to be. Just simply walk around and make sure you haven't bent anything, nothing is cracked, nothing is out of place, so that you know if you go into a trail, you are ready. Another part of inspections that isn't necessarily vehicle specific, but it's a habit you should get into, especially if you're overlanding, going to remote places, or you're traveling with your family. Basic safety and first aid equipment is really important. So from an overlanding perspective, I will check all of my fire extinguishers. I carry 2 in the vehicle, make sure they're serviced and all within the dates they need to be in, and go through your first aid kit. What often happens is that you end up using 1 or 2 things on your trips, from simple headache tablets right down to a med lemon. The problem is you often forget to replenish that. So before you do any form of trail, before you go out on another overland excursion, make sure you've updated your first aid kit. Secondly, update it according to the people that are coming with you within your vehicle. People might have different needs, make sure you cater for them. Lastly, make sure you update your first aid kit according to where you're going. When traveling up in Africa, the first thing that comes to mind for me is a snake bite kit, and even stings as well, from bee stings through to scorpions. That for me is a very important part of our first aid kit that might not be necessary for other places you go to. So make sure you've updated your first aid kit to where you're going, to the people you have within your vehicle, and obviously what you've used in the past. Last part of inspection that is often overlooked as well. As you can see, my snatch strap has been around for a while, and I've noticed in certain places it's starting to fray. That means it's time to throw it out. What I'm ultimately implying here is that you need to do an inspection on all your recovery gear as well. You've done a hard trail previously, you had to do some big snatches, you had to do a lot of digging, you might have lost a glove, you might have lost a shackle. You need to make sure that you've inspected your recovery gear before hitting another trail to make sure you are properly and adequately prepared. So as a summary, you don't need to have a giant checklist. You don't need to be a full-blown mechanic. What is expected of you is to at least know your own vehicle. You don't need to know everything throughout the vehicle. Be familiar with it, so if something does go wrong, you're able to identify that something is different. So in other words, familiarization is key. So again, the basics. Check for fluid leaks. Do a decent engine bay inspection, check all your fluids, check your belts, check your hoses and all the rest of it. Check your tires. You have to air up after a trail, or you have to air down before a trail. Check your tires before and after. From your tires, check your suspension. Make sure nothing is loose, nothing is bent, nothing is cracked. Make sure your shocks hasn't developed a leak or anything like that, none of the seals have gone. From there, check your drivetrain. Make sure your CV boots and everything's in good working order. You haven't picked up a stick, you haven't torn anything. Make sure there's no grass wrapped around in places where there shouldn't be. Clear out all material that shouldn't be there. Make sure everything is sitting straight and looking normal. Then go beyond the vehicle as well. So have a look at your first aid kits. Make sure you've got everything prepared to where you're going. Make sure you've got everything prepared to who's coming with you. Make sure your emergency equipment is all in working order, especially that your fire extinguishers is where it's supposed to be and they've been serviced. And from there, finish off by checking your recovery points. Make sure your recovery gear is in working order, and every now and again get under the vehicle with the socket set and a couple of spanners and just do some tightening of some big bolts and nuts lying around, making sure nothing rattles loose.